Archaeologists have recently made a discovery in Scotland that is changing what we thought we knew about ancient history. The discovery was so surprising that even Joe Rogan talked about it. Hidden in the misty hills of northern Scotland, they found the remains of what seems to be a forgotten city once ruled by the ancient Picts, a mysterious people who lived more than 1,000 years ago. This isn't just a few old stones or broken pottery. It's a whole community, with homes, roads, fireplaces, luxury items from other countries, and signs that this might have been a center of power, maybe even the capital of the Picts. Joe Rogan called it an insane discovery, and for good reason. Once you learn about what was found, you may never think of Scotland the same way again. For centuries, the Picts were mostly a mystery. They appeared on the edges of Roman maps and were described as painted warriors who disappeared into forests and fog. We knew very little about them, only a few stone carvings, scattered ruins, and some vague mentions in ancient texts. They didn't leave behind any writing we can understand. But at their peak, the Picts ruled large parts of what is now northern and eastern Scotland. They resisted the Romans, helped spread early Christianity, and helped shape the future of Scotland. Yet by the 9th century, they seemed to vanish. Historians believed they were either taken over by the Scots or wiped out by Viking invasions. There were no big cities or palaces left behind, just mysterious symbols carved into stones, some showing animals or weapons, and others so strange we still can't explain them. For a long time, archaeologists didn't find much to help understand who the Picts really were. Most of their forts were small and thought to be temporary shelters for small groups. There was no sign of a central government or a true capital city. Many scholars saw them as a side story in Scotland's history, not a main chapter. That began to change in the early 2000s, when archaeologists started digging near Aberdeen. In a small village called Reiney, they found a Pictish stone with a carving of a bearded man holding an axe. This stone, known as the Reiney Man, was important, but it wasn't the only thing discovered there. Researchers also found parts of large, high-status buildings, glass from France, and Roman containers that once held wine. Clearly, someone powerful had lived there, someone with connections far beyond the Scottish Highlands. But it still wasn't enough to call it a capital. Then archaeologists began focusing on a tall hill nearby, known as Taponoth. Standing over 500 meters high, it was home to ancient ruins that people had mostly ignored for years. That changed in 2020, when a team from the University of Aberdeen used drones and laser scanning technology to map the hill and the land around it. What they saw amazed them. Dozens, then hundreds, of circular shapes in the ground, like footprints of old buildings. They kept counting, and soon they found more than 800 flat platforms where round houses had once stood. These weren't random or spread out. They were grouped and organized like a planned town. The scientists dated the remains to the 5th and 6th centuries, the exact time when the Picts were powerful. This wasn't just a small settlement. It was a major city, home to thousands of people. It had roads, homes, places for farming, and even signs of buildings for the elite. This changed everything. The old idea that the Picts were just scattered war bands didn't make sense anymore. This place was clearly organized and advanced. The findings forced historians and archaeologists to rethink what they believed. It meant that the Picts had been building something much bigger than anyone had thought, something hidden for centuries, right on top of that hill. Even though the academic world was shocked, the general public didn't hear much about it at first. But that started to change in 2024 and 2025, when researchers returned to Taponoth to dig deeper. They made even more discoveries and came to a surprising conclusion. Maybe the Picts never truly vanished. Maybe they had been building something big and important all along, something that we're only just now beginning to understand. Taponoth doesn't look special from far away. It's just a steep, rocky hill covered in grass and heather, with sheep grazing at its base. For generations, locals thought it was just a lookout point or maybe a prehistoric fort. But the new research revealed something entirely different. The laser scans showed clear outlines on the ground, not just scattered ruins, but carefully arranged patterns. Archaeologists climbed the hill and started digging, and what they found confirmed what the scans showed. There were flat areas where round houses had once stood, not just a few, but over 800. This wasn't a temporary camp or a place to hide during war. It was a full city built on top of a hill, hidden in plain sight for centuries. The discovery at Taponoth is now one of the most important in Scottish archaeological history. It's helping to solve the mystery of the Picts and showing us that their story was far more complex and impressive than we ever imagined. The estimated population of the ancient Pictish site on Taponoth was between 3,000 and 4,000 people. That makes it one of the biggest early medieval settlements in all of Europe. But strangely, no records from the past mention this place. Not one Pictish source names it, the Romans never included it in their maps, and the old Irish chronicles say nothing about it. This city remained completely hidden for more than 1,000 years, until now. When scientists studied the burned remains of hearths and household materials, they found that people lived there during the 5th and 6th centuries. This was right in the middle of the Pictish era, a time when most historians believed the Picts were split into small, scattered groups without strong central leadership. But this discovery told a very different story. Taponoth wasn't just a small village. It was a real community, with roads, homes built in layers over generations, and signs that people of high status lived there. Archaeologists didn't just find houses. They uncovered areas where people worked with metal, pieces of pottery from other lands, animal bones from organized butchering, and evidence that the size and location of homes showed a class system. The top of the hill had been a special area, likely fortified in the past. The walls had been burned at extremely high temperatures, causing the stones to melt together. No one is sure why this happened. It could have been caused by enemies, a ritual, or something else. But one thing is certain, this place had symbolic power. Whoever lived at the top of Taponoth wasn't just surviving, they were ruling. Down in the valley, more secrets waited to be uncovered. The nearby village of Reiney, once thought to be just a small farming community, showed signs of wealth and foreign connections. Even after the Romans left Britain, Reiney seems to have remained in contact with the outside world. Archaeologists found fancy glass, detailed brooches, and containers for wine, things usually connected to important people. And then there was the Reiney man, a tall stone carving of a bearded warrior holding an axe. His bold expression and unique design suggest he was someone important. Maybe a king, a warrior priest, or a god. This showed that Reiney wasn't just a village near a fort. It may have been a royal and religious center. A massive timber hall, over 20 meters long, was discovered near where the Reiney man stood. The style of the building was similar to royal halls in Ireland from the same time. This could have been where important people lived, or where feasts and political meetings took place. Other nearby structures may have been used for rituals. These discoveries made scholars rethink everything they thought they knew about the Picts. For a long time, the belief was that Pictish society was made up of small, loosely connected tribes. But Reiney suggests something very different. A society with structure, leadership, and perhaps even an early form of government. The imported items show they had trade networks that reached far across Europe, even after the fall of the Roman Empire. Archaeologists also found signs of big gatherings. Burned animal bones, especially from cattle, were carefully sorted, suggesting that feasts or sacrifices were organized events. Artifacts were found in specific zones, areas for living, working, or worship. This wasn't a random group of people. It was a planned community. What makes this even more amazing is how close Reiney is to Taponoth, only about a mile apart. It's hard to imagine two important places like these, both with signs of power, wealth, and religion, existing side by side without being part of something larger. Some researchers now believe Reiney may have been a seasonal capital or a spiritual center for the Pictish kings. Together, Taponoth and Reiney might have been the heart of a royal network, one that history forgot, but is now slowly coming back to light. Taponoth may have once been just an administrative or military site. But when seen together with nearby Reiney, the two locations may actually represent the best evidence we've ever had for a Pictish capital. This theory gained even more support in late 2023 when the University of Aberdeen published a detailed book called Picts, Scourge of Rome, Rulers of the North. The book summarized over 10 years of research and suggested that the Reiney Taponoth area might be the strongest archaeological case yet for an early medieval urban center in Scotland, a kind of early capital, a forgotten kingdom hidden in time. This discovery leaves us with many questions, but also growing excitement. In 2024 and 2025, archaeologists returned to both sites with new technology and bigger goals. What they uncovered didn't just support earlier theories, it completely changed how we think about the Picts and their way of life. The latest findings shocked even experienced archaeologists and could change history as we know it. In the summer of 2024, researchers carried out a detailed excavation on the upper slopes of Taponoth. They reopened several ancient house platforms and dug deeper than before, reaching older layers. In one house, they found several hearths stacked on top of each other. Each one belonged to a different time period, showing that the place had been lived in for generations. But the real surprise was the complexity of these layers. In one of them, they found a piece of Roman pottery that hadn't been recorded before. Another fragment showed tiny carved lines that might be a form of measurement or early writing. If confirmed, this could be one of the first written traces linked to the Picts. In the same area, another team uncovered a pit filled with burned cereal grains, animal bones, and a large, scorched flat stone that had been deliberately placed there. Tests on the grains showed they were processed in such large quantities that no single household could have used them all. This means food was likely stored and distributed at a community level, possibly even taxed, suggesting that there was an organized system of governance, not just people surviving, but managing resources and leading a society. At the same time, another excavation team worked in the valley near Reiney. They examined a structure near a feasting hall that had shown up in earlier scans but hadn't been properly studied. It turned out to be a small ceremonial building. Inside, they found dozens of broken weapons and tools buried intentionally. Some of the iron blades were bent or broken before being placed in the ground. This wasn't random. It matched rituals seen in places like Scandinavia and early Ireland, where important objects were buried after battles or ceremonies. These findings suggest that the people who lived here had complex beliefs, sacred traditions, and possibly a warrior class. When these discoveries were published, they didn't just impress scholars, they caught the attention of the public too. On one episode of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, Rogan and a guest historian discussed the Taponoth findings. Rogan was amazed. He said it was unreal that such a large and organized settlement had existed in Scotland over 1,000 years ago and had remained mostly unknown until now. He pointed out that if something similar had been found in Rome or Egypt, it would be in every school textbook. He wasn't wrong. The discoveries at Taponoth and Reiney show that these places were more than just forts or villages. They were part of something much larger. Together, Taponoth and Reiney formed what we might call a capital. Not a capital in the modern sense with walls, flags, and official buildings, but an ancient heart of political and spiritual power. This was a place where leaders met, alliances were formed, and rituals were carried out. Yet for more than 1,000 years, it was forgotten, buried beneath soil and grass, mistaken for simple ruins. This wasn't just a case of history being overlooked, it was a major chapter of Scottish history that had been lost. But now, that chapter is being reopened. The evidence is too strong to ignore. These discoveries are not just rewriting the story of the Picts, they are tearing down old beliefs that painted them as wild, scattered tribes with little structure or culture. What's emerging now from the ground in northeastern Scotland is something very different. A well-organized society with systems of power, economy, belief, and ritual. This leads to an important question. If Taponoth really was a Pictish capital, why was it forgotten? One reason might be that Taponoth was never meant to be like a Roman city with stone walls, grand buildings, and inscriptions. It was built using timber, turf, and local stone. Its design followed native styles rather than foreign ones. Power here was shown through its high location, control over nearby land, and sacred geography. The entire area was planned to impress, with views from the summit fort and symbol stones placed below in the valley. Everything pointed to authority. But when the people left, their materials didn't last. The wood rotted, the turf crumbled, and only a few stones remained. Another reason may be the political changes in Scotland during the 9th century. As Viking raids became more common and Gaelic influence spread from the west, old power centres began to fall apart or merge. The Picts may not have been defeated in one big war. They may have slowly been absorbed into a new kingdom called Alba. Over time, their culture, leaders, and even their language were replaced or blended with new traditions. This new kingdom wanted to tell a new story, one based on Gaelic roots and Christian kings. The Picts became just a memory, and places like Taponoth faded into shadows. But now, with the recent evidence, those shadows are coming to light. Experts are rethinking old ideas. The size of the site, the way it was planned, and the objects found all suggest that Taponoth wasn't just another small settlement. It was a major center of activity, culture, and leadership. If that's true, then we need to completely change how we view the Picts, not just as painted warriors who raided Roman borders, but as builders, organizers, and rulers of a complex highland kingdom we are only just beginning to understand. And the story isn't over. Even before winter ended, plans for the 2025 excavation season were already in motion. Teams are using advanced scanning methods to study more parts of the area, and scientists are testing hearth samples to learn about food sources and trade routes. Every new discovery brings us closer to finally understanding who the Picts really were, and why their great capital was hidden for so long. One of the early tests on the recent findings revealed something fascinating: traces of grains that didn't come from the local area. This suggests that these grains were either imported or brought in through a complex trade network. If confirmed, it would be one of the first solid archaeological connections showing that the Pictish settlements in the Highlands were involved in wider regional trade. This changes how we think about the Picts. They weren't cut off or isolated, they were likely part of a broader economic system. At the same time, researchers are now looking again at old oral traditions, including Gaelic and Scots legends. For years, these stories were brushed aside as myths or poetic imagination. But now, scholars are starting to listen more carefully. Some tales talk about a hill of kings, a place where warriors gathered and swore oaths before going into battle. Others tell of stones that could only be understood by people born under a certain moon. These stories, once dismissed, may actually hold hidden clues about places like Taponoth and the people who once lived there. If Taponoth really was the Pictish capital, then it wasn't destroyed or erased from memory. It was simply misunderstood and forgotten over time. Now, bit by bit, it's being rediscovered. Each new layer that archaeologists peel back is a reminder that history is never fully settled. It waits quietly, in the cracks of ancient stone, in the ash of hearths long cold, and in the early morning mist that still gathers on the hill. The kingdom was never gone. We just stopped looking for it. Now, the world is finally looking again. What happens next in the story of the Picts is still unfolding. The hill of Taponoth still stands, weathered by centuries of wind and time, quiet and unchanging. But for the first time in over 1,000 years, it is no longer alone. The world is watching. The discoveries made in the past few years have brought new global interest in the Picts, not as a mystery, but as a people who had structure, beliefs, culture, and influence. And this is just the beginning. The University of Aberdeen has already announced a new phase of research. This time, it's not just archaeologists who will be involved. The team will include experts in language, plants, climate, and more. Their goal is to create a complete picture of life at Taponoth: how people lived, what routes they used to travel, what they ate, and what they believed in. Digital models are also being developed, so that one day, people can explore a virtual version of the Pictish capital. Every building, path, and symbol will be reconstructed using real data. Visitors will be able to walk through this lost world as if it were still alive. The effect of this work is also being felt in local communities. Around Reiney, people have launched heritage projects to protect the site, boost tourism, and share the Picts story. What was once a forgotten part of history is now becoming something to be proud of. Young Scots are beginning to see the Picts not just as strange figures carved in stone, but as town builders, lawmakers, and maybe even the earliest founders of the Scottish nation. Of course, many questions remain. Why did Taponoth become silent? Was it slowly abandoned, or did something cause its end? What happened to the people who lived there, the ones who carved sacred stones and lit fires on the hilltop? We may never have all the answers, but we now know more than we ever did before. And maybe that's what matters most. The Picts were never truly lost. They were always there, waiting to be found again. From the high ridges of Aberdeenshire to digital screens and podcasts around the world, their story is being told once more. What archaeologists have recently discovered about this ancient capital didn't just leave us speechless. It left us curious, inspired, and eager to learn more. Because if thousands of people once lived on that long-forgotten hill, ruled by leaders we never named and guided by rituals we only just started to understand, then who knows what other ancient cities lie hidden beneath our feet, quiet, waiting, and ready to be found.